The galaxy wasn't silent. It hummed. A low, resonant thrum of ancient engines, the whisper of stellar winds across nebulae, the distant crackle of supernovae birthing new elements. But for humanity huddled in its fragile bubble of Sol system and the scattered hard-won colonies clinging to the Oort cloud's icy fringe, the silence was deafening. It was the silence of exclusion, the silence of being unseen. For centuries they'd scanned the void, sent out whispers on light-speed comms, built telescopes that could count the grains of sand on a moon 1,000 light-years away. Nothing. Then the Valerie came. Not with fanfare, not with invasion fleets blotting out stars. They arrived like ghosts in polished obsidian ships, sleek and silent as thought. They spoke not of conquest, but of custodianship. They claimed dominion over the spiral arm, guardians of a cosmic order humanity hadn't even known existed. And their most chilling declaration? Immortality. Not the slow decay of uploaded consciousnesses or cloned bodies humanity had dabbled in. True, biological immortality. Cells that repaired flawlessly, telomeres that never frayed, minds that accumulated millennia without a single neuron lost to entropy. They called it the eternal bloom. They offered it, conditionally, to species deemed worthy, peaceful, compliant. Humanity, scarred by its own brutal history, fractured by resource wars and ideological schisms even as it reached for the stars, was deemed not worthy. Not yet, perhaps never. The Valari imposed the Pax Aeternar, a fragile, suffocating peace enforced by their silent, indestructible presence. Human expansion ceased. Human ambition was shackled. Their worlds became gilded cages under the watchful, ageless eyes of beings who saw centuries as mere seasons. On the grimy, rain-slicked streets of New Shanghai, Luna Dr. Aris Thorne watched the Valari patrol glide past, not walking, gliding. Their forms were tall, slender, encased in seamless, iridescent carapaces that shifted color like oil on water. No visible joints, no faces, just smooth, featureless ovals where heads should be. They moved with an unnerving liquid grace, utterly silent. To them, the frantic energy of the human city, the shouts, the sirens, the clatter of maglev trains, was background noise. Insignificant, like the buzzing of insects. Eris pulled his worn synthwool coat tighter, the damp chill seeping into his bones. He wasn't just watching the patrol, he was studying it. Specifically, the faint, almost imperceptible shimmer that occasionally rippled across their carapaces when they passed under the harsh sodium vapor streetlights. A resonance signature, a flaw, or a feature. His mind, honed by decades in xenobiology labs buried deep beneath Luna's regolith, raced. The Valari claimed perfection. Perfection, Eris knew from a lifetime dissecting Earth's most resilient extremophiles, was a myth. Every system had a breaking point. Every immortal had a shadow. Back in his cramped, cluttered lab, a converted storage unit smelling of ozone, stale coffee, and the faint metallic tang of biogel, Eris hunched over a holographic display. Data streams flowed like liquid light. Genetic sequences lifted from microscopic environmental samples near Valari landing zones, energy signatures from their ships, thermal readings, all pointing to the same impossible conclusion. Their cellular machinery operated on principles that defied known physics. Entropy seemed to bow to them. His comm chimed. A sharp, insistent sound in the quiet hum of machinery. The face that appeared on the small screen was sharp, weathered, eyes like chips of flint set in a face that had seen too many battles fought in the shadows. Commander Ilara Vance, head of Solsek's clandestine Xenotech division. Her voice was gravel scraped over ice. Thorn status. Acuris didn't look up. Still chasing ghosts, Commander. Their biology, it's like trying to map a black hole with a flashlight. Every probe I send bounces off or gets absorbed. No decay markers. No telomere shortening. Nothing. Ghosts don't enforce the Pax Aeterna with orbital kinetic rods, Vance snapped. Ghosts don't freeze our shipyards and tax our helium-3 mines into oblivion. Find the crack, Eris. Find the one thing that makes them bleed. Eris finally met her gaze through the screen. What if they don't bleed, Ilara? What if they're truly beyond it? Vance's expression hardened. Then we find a way to make them wish they could." She leaned closer, her voice dropping, becoming almost intimate in its intensity. "Remember Titan. Remember the Ares dawn. They didn't just disable it, they unmade it, atom by atom, said it was correcting an anomaly. An anomaly named Captain Rustova, and her crew. My sister was on that ship Ares. My sister," her knuckles whitened on the edge of her desk, visible in the feed. "They think we're insects. Annoying, perhaps, but ultimately disposable. Prove them wrong." The comm cut off, leaving Ares alone with the ghosts of Data and the specter of loss. He turned back to his display, zooming in on a particularly anomalous energy fluctuation recorded near a Valari biostasis chamber. It pulsed with a rhythm that felt wrong, not chaotic but suppressed, like a heartbeat deliberately held still. On the bridge of the Vatellary custodian vessel, Whisper of Eternity, hovering in geosynchronous orbit above Earth. The entity known as Kalen observed the blue-green marble below. Through its multispectral sensors, it saw not beauty, but inefficiency. Chaotic weather patterns, unstable tectonic plates. A biosphere, teeming with violent, short-lived organisms, locked in a constant, wasteful struggle for survival. Deathworlders. The term was clinical, accurate. Humanity's brief, frantic existence was a flicker against the Vatellary's unbroken timeline. Aelin communicated not with words but with complex pulses of light and resonant frequencies shared directly through the ship's neural lattice with its fellow custodians. The consensus was clear: humanity remained a volatile variable. Their recent attempts to develop faster-than-light communication, a crude, energy-intensive tachyon burst system, had been deemed a potential destabilizer. It had been corrected. The Ares Dawn incident was regrettable, but necessary. Order required pruning. A subordinate resonance pulsed, carrying concern. The Luna anomaly persists. The human researcher, Thorn, his probes grow more sophisticated. He senses the resonance. Kalen's internal processes, vast and ancient, considered this. Curiosity was a known human trait. Often dangerous, but predictable, easily contained. Let him sense. Let him chase phantoms. His understanding is limited by his mortality. He cannot comprehend the bloom. His efforts are quaint, a flicker of something akin to pity, cold and distant, passed through Keelan's consciousness. Focus on the compliance audit of Mars Colony Gamma. Their resource allocation reports show irregularities, the subordinate resonance acknowledged, fading back into the ship's hume. Keelan returned its attention to the planet below. A storm was brewing over the Pacific, beautiful in its transient fury, meaningless in the grand design. The Violari had witnessed stars die and galaxies collide. Human storms were dust motes in a sunbeam. Weeks bled into months. Ares became a ghost himself, haunting the lower levels of Luna's research complexes, trading sleep for data, sanity for slivers of insight. He found patterns in the suppression. The Violari weren't just resistant to decay. They actively repelled it. Their cells emitted a field that negated entropy at a quantum level. It was the ultimate defense. But defenses, Ares knew, required energy. And energy sources could be disrupted. He theorized a counter-frequency. A resonant pulse tuned not to destroy but to overwhelm their entropy negation field. To force their perfect systems to confront the very thing they'd banished: decay. Death, not as an external force, but as an internal cascade they could no longer suppress. He called it Project Thanatos. A grim joke only he understood. He needed a test subject. Not human. Too risky. Too final. He needed something Violari. Something small, something discarded. His break came from an unexpected source. A black market data broker operating out of the asteroid belt. For a price paid in rare Earth-grown coffee beans, a luxury the Violari inexplicably coveted. The broker delivered a data crystal. Inside, schematic. Not of a ship, but of a Violari bio-waste filtration unit. Recovered from a derelict maintenance drone near Jupiter's orbit. The drone had malfunctioned, its systems failing in a way that shouldn't have been possible for Violari tech. Eris's hands trembled as he loaded the data. Buried within the filtration protocols, masked as routine maintenance logs, was a treasure trove. Raw cellular decay signatures from within a failing Velari system. Proof. Proof that their immortality wasn't absolute. It could be broken. He worked feverishly, cross-referencing the decay signatures with his resonance models. The counter-frequency began to take shape. A complex, multi-layered harmonic designed to resonate with the specific quantum signature of their entropy negation field, inducing catastrophic feedback. It wouldn't be a weapon of brute force. It would be a key to unlock the door death had been barred from for millennia. He presented his findings cautiously to Vance. In her stark, utilitarian office overlooking the lunar surface, he laid out the theory, the data, the terrifying potential. Vance listened, her face unreadable. When he finished, she stood, walked to the viewport, and stared at the distant, watchful shape of the Whisper of Eternity. "You're talking about killing gods, Aris." "They're not gods," Aris said, his voice tight with exhaustion and fervor. "They're just very good at hiding their mortality. This is the crack in their armor. The one thing they never accounted for. That something designed to die might figure out how to make them die too." Vance turned, her eyes locking onto his. "Can you build it? This Thanatos pulse?" "Not here. Not with Solsec resources. They're watched too closely. I need a black site. Somewhere deep. Somewhere the Velari sensors don't linger." He named a location, the abandoned Helium-3 mining outpost on Proteus, Neptune's battered moon. Forgotten, irradiated, perfect. Vance nodded slowly. "I'll get you transport. Discreet. You have 2 weeks, Ares. 2 weeks to build the key to death itself, and pray to whatever gods you believe in that it works." She paused, her voice dropping to a whisper. "And pray it doesn't get us all unmade like the Ares dawn." On Proteus, the silence was absolute, not the hum of the galaxy, but the crushing, airless silence of the outer system. Aris worked in a pressurized lab module bolted onto the skeletal remains of the old mining rig. Outside, Neptune loomed, a swirling icy giant casting long, cold shadows. The only sounds were the whir of life support, the click of his tools, and the frantic beating of his own heart. He assembled the Thanatos emitter. It looked deceptively simple, a crystalline lattice core humming with contained energy, surrounded by resonant coils tuned to the precise lethal frequency. It drew power from a micro-singularity battery. Risky, unstable, but necessary for the immense, instantaneous energy burst required. 1 shot. That's all it would get. He tested it on a sample of Velari bio-waste from the drone schematics, suspended in a containment field. He activated the emitter at minimal power. The sample, previously inert, began to flicker. Not decay, not yet, but the perfect, stable structure showed microfractures. The entropy negation field was straining. Hope, sharp and dangerous, flared in Aris's chest. He increased the power incrementally. Each test brought the sample closer to the edge. He recorded everything, his hands steady despite the tremor in his soul. This was it, the culmination of years of obsession, grief, and defiance. On the final test, he pushed the emitter to 90% capacity. The bio-waste sample didn't just decay, it unraveled. Not into dust, but into a chaotic cascade of fundamental particles, releasing a burst of energy that spiked his sensors off the charts before vanishing. True, irreversible dissolution, death. Upgraded. Aris slumped back, sweat stinging his eyes. It worked. It worked. He had done the impossible. He had weaponized mortality against the immortal. He activated the secure comlink to Vance. Commander, Thanatos is operational. Full yield confirmed. Ready for deployment. Vance's voice crackled back, tight with tension. Understood. Stand by. We have a situation. The Velari just issued a level Omega compliance directive. They're demanding immediate surrender of all human FITL research data and personnel, including you, Aris. They know. Ice flooded Aris's veins. How? Had the broker betrayed him? Had his tests been detected? It didn't matter. The Pax Eterna was over. The pruning had begun. "Get out of there, S," Vance ordered. "Now. We're scrambling a stealth courier. Rendezvous at Grid Sigma 7 in 12 hours. Eris looked at the Thanatos emitter, then at the viewport. Neptune's storms churned, indifferent. He thought of Rostova. Of all the humans erased for daring to reach. He thought of Kalen watching from orbit, seeing only insects. "No," Eris said, his voice suddenly calm, resolute. "I'm not running. They want the key? Let them come and take it." He severed the comm link before Vance could argue. He armed the Thanatos emitter, setting it to remote trigger. Then he did something reckless, desperate. He opened a standard, unencrypted SolNet channel, the kind the Valeri monitored constantly. He patched in the raw sensor data from the final test. The cascade, the energy spike, the undeniable signature of Valeri matter being unmade. He didn't speak. He just let the data stream out into the void, a silent, screaming challenge broadcast on a frequency the custodians couldn't ignore. On the whisper of eternity, Kalen's sensors flared with the anomalous transmission. The resonance pattern was wrong, profoundly wrong. It resonated with the suppressed flaw in their own bloom, the one they meticulously controlled, the one they never spoke of. It was a frequency of unmaking, of ending. Alarm resonances, sharp and discordant, erupted through the ship's lattice. Anomaly detected. Source, Proteus. Outpost, Theta. Signature, entropic cascade. Kalen's ancient mind, accustomed to eons of unchallenged order, recoiled. This was impossible. A violation of fundamental law. Yet the data was irrefutable. The Deathworlders, they had touched the forbidden. They had found the shadow. Deploy custodian enforcers. Kalen pulsed, its internal calm shattered by a cold, unfamiliar dread. Maximum priority. Retrieve the source. Eliminate all witnesses. Contain the anomaly at all costs. 3 obsidian Valeri interceptors, sleek and silent as falling knives, detached from the whisper of eternity and streaked towards the outer system, leaving trails of warped space-time in their wake. Eris Thorn watched their approach on his long-range sensors, 3 cold stars burning brighter against the backdrop of Neptune's icy glow. He clutched the remote trigger for the Thanatos emitter, its surface cool against his palm. He thought of Alara Vance, probably screaming orders into a dead calm. He thought of the billions on Earth, unaware their fragile peace was about to shatter. He thought of death, not as an end, but as a tool, humanity's oldest, most intimate companion, the one thing the Valeri had forgotten how to fear. The interceptors entered Proteus's orbit. Their weapons systems powered up, bathing the desolate moon in an invisible, lethal energy field. Eris took a deep breath of the recycled metallic air. He thumbed the safety off the trigger. "Let's see how immortal you really are," he thought, as the first Valeri beam lanced down towards his lab module, vaporizing rock and metal in a silent, incandescent flash. The beam struck the lab module's reinforced roof like the fist of an angry god. Metal screamed, then flowed like liquid, then vanished into superheated plasma. Alarms shrieked, klaxons blaring a futile warning against the inevitable. Eris was thrown against the far wall, the breath knocked from his lungs, the remote trigger clattering from his hand. Smoke and the acrid stench of vaporized circuitry filled the air. Through the buckling viewport he saw the obsidian interceptors hovering, silent sentinels of judgment. Too slow. The thought was cold, clear. He scrambled on hands and knees through the wreckage, ignoring the sting of shrapnel in his cheek, the ringing in his ears. His fingers closed around the cool metal of the trigger. He rolled onto his back, pressing himself flat against the shuddering floor, as another beam carved a molten trench through the module's structure, missing him by meters. The heat was unbearable. He activated the remote. Not to fire. Not yet. He needed them closer. He needed them inside the effective radius. He needed to see their perfect carapaces crack. He triggered the lab's emergency beacon, a bright, pulsing Solsec distress signal, guaranteed to draw their attention to make them think he was cornered, desperate. Exactly what he was. The interceptors shifted, their focus narrowing on the flickering light. One detached from the formation, descending lower, its underside opening like a dark flower to deploy a boarding pod. Eris's heart hammered against his ribs. Come on, just a little closer. He could see the intricate patterns on the pod's surface now, shimmering with that same unnerving resonance. He raised the trigger, his finger hovering over the activation stud. Sweat dripped into his eyes. This was it. One shot, one chance to shatter eternity. The boarding pod settled onto the fractured roof with a soft thud that vibrated through the deck plates. A hatch arazed open. A Veilari enforcer emerged. Taller than the patrols on Luna, its carapace darker, edged with sharp, angular protrusions that hummed with contained energy. It moved with predatory grace, scanning the ruined lab with sensors Eris couldn't see. It found him instantly, a crumpled figure in the corner. It raised a limb, not a hand, but a smooth, tapered appendage that began to glow with building energy. Eris didn't hesitate. He slammed his thumb down on the trigger. Nothing happened. The emitter was dead. The beam strike must have severed its power conduit or fried its core. Despair, cold and absolute, washed over him. He'd failed. Rostova, Vance, Earth, all for nothing. The enforcer took a step forward, the energy in its limb intensifying, casting sharp, dancing shadows. Eris closed his eyes, waiting for the end. Then a different sound tore through the chaos. Not the silent hum of Veilari tech, but the roar of atmospheric thrusters and the shriek of tearing metal. A soul-sec stealth courier, battered and smoking, slammed into the side of the boarding pod like a battering ram. The impact was colossal, crumpling the pod's structure and sending the enforcer staggering back. The courier's ramp dropped. Commander Alara Vance stood there, clad in tactical armor, a heavy plasma rifle leveled. Her face was grim, etched with fury and relief. "Move, Eris. Now." Eris didn't need telling twice. He lunged for the ramp as Vance opened fire. Plasma bolts, superheated bolts of ionized gas, slammed into the enforcer's carapace. They didn't penetrate, but they splashed, sending showers of molten energy across its surface, momentarily disrupting its resonance. The enforcer hissed, a sound like steam escaping a cracked pipe, and raised its limb defensively. Eris scrambled up the ramp, grabbing the dead Thanatos emitter. Vance fired a final, covering burst, then slammed the ramp control. The courier lurched violently as it broke atmosphere, the thrusters screaming in protest. Behind them, the two remaining interceptors opened fire, their beams slicing through the thin hull of the Proteus outpost, turning it into a brief, incandescent star before it collapsed into rubble. Inside the shuddering courier, Eris gasped for air, clutching the emitter like a talisman. It didn't work, Alara. The power. Vance was already at the controls, weaving through debris with desperate skill. It doesn't matter now. They know. The whole galaxy probably knows. That data stream, it was loud. She glanced back, her eyes hard. But you proved it's possible. That's the spark we needed. The spark ignited a wildfire. News of the Proteus incident. The anomalous energy signature, the Veilari's violent overreaction, spread like a virus through the human networks the custodians couldn't fully suppress. Whispers became shouts. Fear curdled into defiance. On Mars, workers sabotaged Veilari resource audits. On Saris, students staged silent vigils holding signs with the Thanatos resonance pattern. On Earth, underground cells began stockpiling weapons, not just kinetic but jury-rigged emitters based on Aris's leaked, fragmented schematics. The Veilari response was swift and brutal. The Pax Eterna dissolved into the Scourge. Orbital strikes targeted known dissident hubs. Veilari enforcers descended on human settlements, not just to arrest but to demonstrate. They would select a random human, often a child, and with chilling precision use their entropy negation fields not to preserve but to accelerate decay. Flesh would wither, bones would crumble to dust in seconds, a horrifying display of controlled mortality meant to break the human spirit. They called it corrective pruning. It didn't break them. It forged them. Eris and Vance were smuggled back to a hidden Solsec bunker deep beneath the Siberian permafrost. The air was cold, recycled, smelling of ozone and desperation. Eris worked obsessively, not on the original emitter, but on miniaturizing the core principle. He needed something deployable, something that could be carried hidden, used in the chaos of urban warfare. He called it the Mortality Seed, a grenade-sized device that upon detonation would emit a short-range, high-intensity Thanatos pulse. Vance coordinated the resistance. She was a storm given human form, ruthless, strategic, haunted by her sister's ghost, but fiercely protective of the flicker of hope Eris had ignited. She saw the cost, saw the reports of corrective pruning, saw the faces of the broken survivors. It hardened her, but didn't extinguish the fire in her eyes. "We can't just fight them head-on, Eris," she said one night, staring at a holographic map of Earth dotted with Valeri strongholds and human resistance cells. "They're ships, they're enforcers, they're too strong. We need to hit them where it hurts, where they feel it." Eris looked up from his workbench, his eyes bloodshot. "Their immortality is their weakness, Alara. It's their arrogance. They've forgotten what death feels like. They've forgotten the fear. We don't just need to kill them, we need to make them afraid to die." Vance nodded slowly. "Then we give them a war they can't win by outlasting us. A war where every alley, every building, every human is a potential grave they can't escape." On the whisper of eternity, Kalen observed the escalating chaos. The Deathworlders were not behaving as predicted. Their defiance was illogical, wasteful, suicidal, yet it was spreading. The resonance anomaly, the Thanatos signature, was appearing in crude, localized bursts across human settlements. Minor enforcers caught in the blasts hadn't been destroyed, but their bloom had stuttered. For precious nanoseconds, they had experienced the terrifying sensation of cellular instability, of potential ending. It was a psychic wound deeper than any physical damage. Kalen convened the custodian conclave. Resonances pulsed through the ship's core, a symphony of ancient minds grappling with an unprecedented threat. "The anomaly is proliferating," pulsed a senior custodian, its resonance tinged with unease. "It exploits a fundamental vulnerability in the Bloom's entropy negation field. A vulnerability we believed, theoretical, contained. The Deathworlders understand decay on an instinctive level." Another pulsed, a note of something akin to disgust in its tone. "They weaponize their own mortality against us. It is perverse." Containment has failed. Kalen pulsed, its own resonance colder, harder than before. The flicker of dread had solidified into cold fury. The anomaly must be eradicated at its source, not just the devices, but the knowledge. The capacity for this perversion must be excised from this sector, permanently. "The scourge intensifies," came the consensus. "Deploy the Bloom Wardens." The Bloom Wardens were different. Not enforcers, but custodians of the highest order. Their carapaces woven with strands of pure chronoton energy, their very presence radiating an aura of absolute temporal stability. They were the guardians of the eternal bloom itself, rarely deployed, their purpose not enforcement but preservation of the Valerie's core immortality principle. Sending them against Deathworlders was an act of profound desperation. The first warden descended upon New Shanghai. It didn't arrive in a ship. It simply appeared in the central plaza, materializing from warped space-time with a silent implosion of light. Its presence was oppressive, a weight on the very air. Humans nearby felt a sudden, inexplicable lethargy, a slowing of thought, as if time itself thickened around the warden. It moved towards the Solsec resistance cell known to be operating in the old financial district. Plasma fire from hidden emplacements washed over it, dissipating harmlessly against its chronoton aura. Mortality seeds were thrown. They detonated, releasing their Thanatos pulses. But the warden's aura absorbed the entropic energy, converting it into a brief, localized surge of temporal stability. The seeds were useless. The warden reached the resistance hideout. With a gesture, it unleashed a wave of pure temporal stasis. Humans caught in the field didn't die. They froze, mid-scream, mid-step, mid-thought. Their biological processes halted, suspended in a single eternal moment. Not death, but an endless, conscious limbo. A fate, Kalen believed, far worse than mere dissolution for creatures so obsessed with their fleeting moments. Vance watched the horror unfold on a cracked monitor in the Siberian bunker, her face ashen. "They're not just killing us, Eris. They're erasing us from time." Eris stared at the frozen figures on the screen, a cold horror dawning. The Wardens weren't just immune to Thanatos. They could counter it, twist it into something even more monstrous. His weapon was failing. Humanity's defiance was being met with a power they couldn't comprehend, let alone combat. "We need to understand them," Eris whispered, his voice raw. "Not just their weakness, but their strength. Why are the Wardens different? What's the source of that temporal aura?" Vance looked at him, a new kind of desperation in her eyes. "How? They're untouchable." Eris's gaze fell on the dead Thanatos emitter he'd salvaged from Proteus. An idea dangerous and insane began to form. Not untouchable. Just shielded. What if we don't attack the shield? What if we use it? What if we overload it? The plan was madness. Utter suicidal madness. But it was the only spark left. They would lure a Bloom Warden. Not to a hideout, but to a place saturated with human life, human time, the Grand Central Biodome on Luna, a vast pressurized garden city housing millions. The chaos, the sheer density of biological processes might create interference, might create an opening. Eris would be the bait. He would carry a modified mortality seed, not designed to emit a pulse, but to absorb and amplify the Warden's own temporal energy, then feed it back in a catastrophic feedback loop. It was like trying to catch lightning in a bottle made of glass. One mistake, and he'd be frozen forever. Or worse. Vance argued, pleaded, threatened. But Eris was resolute. "It has to be me, Alara. I understand the resonance. I built the seed. If anyone can trigger it at the right moment." He didn't finish. They both knew the odds. The trap was set. False data leaks pointed to a major Resistance Council meeting in the Biodome's central arboretum. Valori sensors, ever watchful, took the bait. A Bloom Warden materialized in the dome's main concourse, its arrival causing a wave of temporal distortion that made the lush greenery momentarily wilt and the air shimmer like a heat haze. Panic erupted. Humans screamed, running in all directions, a chaotic storm of life against the Warden's stillness. Eris, disguised as a maintenance worker, stood near a support pillar, the modified seed cold in his hand. He watched the Warden move with unhurried inevitability towards the arboretum, its aura causing people to freeze mid-stride, their faces locked in expressions of terror. He activated the seed's absorption field. It hummed softly, almost inaudibly, drawing in the ambient temporal energy radiating from the Warden. The device grew warm, then hot in his hand. Warning lights flickered on its surface. He was close, too close. The Warden turned. Its smooth, featureless faceplate seemed to fix on him. It knew. It knew. It raised a limb, not to freeze but to unmake. Chronetan energy gathered, a vortex of distorted time forming at its tip. Eris didn't hesitate. He threw the seed, not at the Warden but at the base of a massive, ancient oak tree in the arboretum, a focal point of life, of deep, slow time. He triggered the feedback sequence. The seed detonated, not with a pulse of death, but with a scream of amplified temporal energy. It ripped through the Warden's aura, not negating it but overloading it. The Chronetan vortex at the Warden's limb flared violently, then imploded. For a single horrifying second the Warden stuttered. Its perfect carapace flickered, revealing glimpses of something beneath, not flesh, but a complex lattice of light and energy, writhing in agony. A sound emerged, not a hiss but a high-pitched, keening wail that resonated in the bones of everyone nearby, the sound of eternity breaking. Then the Warden collapsed, not into dust but into a pile of inert gray ash that crumbled to nothing in the recycled air. Silence. Utter, stunned silence fell over the biodome. The frozen humans remained frozen, but the Warden was gone, truly gone. Eris sank to his knees, trembling, tears cutting tracks through the grime on his face. It worked, he'd broken one. But the cost, the frozen people, the sheer wrongness of the Warden's death scream. On the whisper of eternity, Kalen felt the warden's dissolution like a physical blow. A resonance of pure, unadulterated terror echoed through the custodian lattice. The terror of the warden in its final nanosecond. The terror of facing true, irreversible end. It was a sensation the Valari had not felt in 10 million years. Kalen's ancient mind reeled. The Deathworlders hadn't just found a weapon. They had found a key to the Valori's deepest, most primal fear, the fear that had driven them to seek immortality in the first place. The fear of the void. They understand, Kalen pulsed, its resonance shaking with a dread that bordered on panic. They understand the blight. The revelation struck the conclave like a supernova. The blight. The ancient, forgotten horror that had nearly consumed their species eons ago. The cataclysm that had forced them to develop the eternal bloom. A plague of accelerated entropy that turned stars to cinders and civilizations to dust in moments. They had sealed the knowledge of the blight away, buried it deep within their collective memory, considering it extinct, a nightmare of the past. But the Deathworlders, they hadn't just rediscovered decay, they had weaponized a principle akin to the blight. They were wielding a shadow of the very thing that had almost ended the Violari. The anomaly is not merely a weapon, Kalen pulsed, its voice resonating with a terrible finality. It is the blight reborn, and the Deathworlders. They are its carrier. The custodian conclave fell silent. The implications were apocalyptic. If the blight could be weaponized, if it could spread, their immortality was not just vulnerable, it was potentially contagious. The Deathworlders weren't just rebels. They were an existential plague. Total sterilization, Kalen decreed, its resonance cold, absolute, devoid of the pity it once held. The Sol System. All human worlds. All traces of their existence. All knowledge of the blight anomaly. Purge it from the galaxy. Before it spreads, before it consumes us all. Orders were sent. The Valari fleet, dormant for centuries, began to stir. Not just custodian ships, but the true war vessels, the Bloom Reapers, designed not for enforcement, but for absolute system-wide annihilation. Their weapons weren't kinetic rods or stasis fields, they were entropy projectors, capable of unraveling matter on a planetary scale, reducing worlds to inert, lifeless dust, a final, desperate quarantine. Vance received the intelligence from a deep cover agent moments before the signal was jammed. She found Aris in the bunker, staring blankly at the wall, haunted by the warden's death scream. "They're coming, Aris," she said, her voice stripped of all emotion, hollowed out by the scale of the threat. "Not to conquer, to erase. Every human, every colony, every memory. They think we're infected with something that can kill them." Aris looked at her, his eyes wide with dawning horror. He understood. They hadn't just built a weapon. They'd accidentally resurrected the Valari's oldest nightmare. And now the galaxy's self-proclaimed guardians were about to commit genocide to contain it. "The Bloom Reapers," he whispered. "They'll use entropy projectors. Not just to kill, to unmake." Vance nodded, a single tear tracing a path through the grime on her cheek. "We have one chance, Ares. One shot. Before they glass Earth. Before they turn Sol into a tomb." She placed a data chip on the table between them. "The Odyssey, our last, best hope, hidden in the Kuiper Belt, 50L drive, armed with everything we have left, including the Master Thanatos emitter core." Aris picked up the chip. It felt heavy. "Final. Where are we going?" "Not where," Vance said, her eyes burning with a fierce, desperate light. "When? We're not running away, Aris. We're running back to the source. To the heart of their fear, to the place where the blight was born." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a fierce whisper. "We're going to make them face the ghost they've been running from for 10 million years. And we're going to show them that humanity doesn't just carry death, we are death, and death always wins." Outside the bunker, the first distant tremors of orbital bombardment began to shake the Siberian ice. The Odyssey wasn't a warship, it was a ghost. A needle of scavenged alloys and stolen Violari stealth tech barely large enough for its skeleton crew of 12, the last desperate hope of a species marked for extinction. It hung in the ink-black void beyond the Kuiper Belt, dwarfed by the swirling majesty of the Oort cloud, a silent witness to the dying gasps of Sol System. On its bridge, lit only by the soft glow of consoles and the distant cold light of 1,000 comets, Eris Thorn watched the tactical display. Earth was a fading ember. Mars was dark. Luna was silent. The Valari Bloom Reapers, vast obsidian leviathans bristling with entropy trajectors, moved with grim efficiency, systematically reducing human worlds to sterile, airless rocks. The Pax Aeterna was a memory. The scourge was complete. Only the Odyssey remained. Commander Ilara Vance stood beside him, her face etched with exhaustion and a grief so profound it had calcified into cold, hard purpose. She didn't look at the dying worlds. Her eyes were fixed on the star charts, on the coordinates burning in the nav computer. Coordinates Vance's deep cover agent had died to transmit, coordinates buried in the oldest Valari archives, coordinates pointing to a dead star system in the galactic rim, a place the custodians called the Scar. The Blight's origin point, Vance said, her voice rough, where their ancestors barely escaped extinction, where they sealed the knowledge away. They think it's empty. A tomb. They're wrong. Eris traced the trajectory on the display. It's a suicide run, Ilara. Even if we survive the jump, even if we find what we're looking for, what then? We're one ship against their entire fleet. We're not fighting their fleet, Vance corrected, turning to him. Her eyes held a terrifying clarity. We're fighting their fear. We go to the Scar. We find the source of the Blight, the original entropy plague, or its echo, or the weapon that created it, and we activate it, not as a weapon against them, but as a beacon, a signal flare screaming the Blight is here, right in their ancestral nightmare. Eris understood. It was psychological warfare on a cosmic scale. Force the Valari to confront the very thing they'd spent eons running from. Make them pursue the Odyssey into the heart of their terror, or let the Blight, real or perceived, potentially either way, Sol System might be spared long enough for scattered human survivors to hide, to rebuild. Load the Master Thanatos core into the main emitter array, Vance ordered the crew. We might need to encourage the Blight to wake up. The Odyssey's FTL drive whined, a sound like tearing fabric across space-time. Stars stretched into lines of light, then snapped back into points as the ship dropped into real space near the Scar. It was a graveyard. A single, cold white dwarf star pulsed weakly at the system's center, casting long, skeletal shadows across the ruins of dead planets. Asteroids drifted like broken teeth, and at the heart of it all, hanging in the void like a monstrous seed pod, was the structure. It wasn't Valari, it was older, cruder, built of dark, non-reflective metal that seemed to drink the starlight. It pulsed with a faint, sickly green luminescence, the signature of uncontrolled entropic decay. The Blight engine. The source. It's alive, Eris breathed, his sensors screaming with chaotic energy readings. Dormant, but active, feeding on the star's death throes. Vance's jaw tightened. That's our beacon. Eris, can you interface the Thanatos core with it? Amplify its signal? Make it scream across the galaxy? Maybe, Eris said, already moving towards the engineering console. But it's unstable, like trying to plug a live wire into a volcano. One wrong move. Do it, Vance said. We don't have a choice. As Aris worked splicing Valyri-derived tech into the ancient alien machinery through a jury-rigged umbilical, the Odyssey's long-range sensors blared. Valyri signatures, dozens of them. The Bloom Reapers. They'd tracked them. Kalen hadn't taken the bait. It had followed the contagion. They're here, the sensor officer reported, voice tight with fear. Closing fast. Weapons hot. Vance didn't flinch. Hold position. Aris. How long? Almost there. Aris slammed the final connection home. The Blight engine flared, the green light intensifying, washing over the Odyssey's hull. Warning klaxons shrieked as entropic decay began to eat at the ship's outer layers. It's working. The signal is amplifying, but it's drawing power from the engine. It's waking it up. On the bridge of the lead Bloom Reaper, eternal vigil, Kalen observed the Odyssey and the flaring Blight engine. The resonance was unmistakable. The Blight, not a weapon, but the source, the nightmare made manifest. The Deathworlders hadn't just carried the Blight, they had awakened it. Panic, cold and absolute, threatened to shatter Kalen's ancient composure. The conclave resonated with terror. Contain it. Destroy the source. Destroy the carrier. Kalen pulsed a command, its resonance sharp with desperation. Focus all entropy projectors on the Blight engine. Sterilize the anomaly. The Bloom Reapers opened fire. Beams of pure, unmaking entropy lanced across the void, converging on the ancient structure. But the Blight engine, supercharged by the Thanatos core, didn't just absorb the energy, it fed on it. The green luminescence exploded outwards in a wave of accelerated decay. The leading edge of the wave hit the nearest Bloom Reaper. Its obsidian hull didn't melt. It crumbled. Like ancient stone exposed to acid rain, it dissolved into gray dust that scattered on the solar wind. The ship vanished in seconds, its crew, immortal for millennia, erased without a trace. Chaos erupted among the Veilari fleet. Ships veered wildly, firing wildly, trying to escape the expanding wave of Blight. But the wave was growing, feeding on the entropy projector's own energy, feeding on the very attempts to destroy it. It was a runaway cascade. The Blight, it's consuming them. The sensor officer yelled over the alarms. It's spreading faster. Eris stared at the display, horrified. It's not just a signal, Alara, the Thanatos core. It's acting like a catalyst. It's turning the Blight engine into a bomb that eats reality. Vance watched the Veilari fleet disintegrate, ship after ship turning to dust. There was no triumph in her eyes, only grim understanding. They brought this on themselves. Their fear, their arrogance. They tried to kill death and death swallowed them whole. She turned to Eris. Can we stop it? Can we shut it down? Eris frantically scanned the feedback loops. The core, it's fused. The only way to stop the cascade is to overload the Blight engine's primary containment. Blow it from the inside. But it'll take a massive energy surge. More than the Odyssey can generate. Vance's gaze fell on the Veilari entropy projectors, still firing futilely into the Blight wave, only making it stronger. A terrible, beautiful idea formed. We don't need to generate it, Eris. We just need to redirect it. She slammed her fist on the comms. All hands, brace for impact. Engineering, reroute all power to the forward shields. Helm, plot a collision course with the Blight engine's core nexus. Maximum thrust. Eris understood instantly. Ilara, no! The radiation, the decay. The ship won't survive. It's not about surviving, Vance roared, her eyes blazing with the fire of 1,000 lost souls. It's about ending this. For Rostova, for Earth, for everyone they erased. We give the Blight one last meal and make it choke. She met Eris's eyes, a flicker of sorrow, then resolve. Get to the escape pod, Eris. Now. That's an order. Eris hesitated, the weight of her sacrifice crushing him, but he saw the truth in her eyes. This was her penance, her redemption. He nodded, a single sharp movement, and ran for the pod bay. The Odyssey, its shields flaring with stolen Veilari energy, plunged into the heart of the Blight engine. It didn't explode. It imploded. The ship, the Thanatos core, the focused energy of the Veilari projectors, all were consumed by the Blight engine's core. For a single blinding moment the green light went supernova, brighter than the dead star itself. Then silence. The Blight wave collapsed in on itself, vanishing as if it had never been. The expanding cloud of Veilari dust hung in the void, the only testament to the fleet that had sought to impose eternal order. The Blight engine was gone, reduced to inert, harmless fragments. In the escape pod, tumbling through the silent graveyard of the Scar, Eris watched the aftermath on his small screen. Tears streamed down his face, not just for Vance, but for the terrible cost, monstrous weapon they'd unleashed. Even in its destruction, he had patented Death's final upgrade, and it had consumed everything. Years later, a different star system. A hidden human colony, nestled in the rings of a gas giant, thriving in secrecy. Aris Thorne, older, his face lined with the weight of memory, stood on a balcony overlooking a valley of alien flora. He held a simple data slate. A young girl, maybe 10, with eyes too old for her face, approached him. She'd heard the stories, the ghosts of Soli, the Valerie, the woman who flew the Odyssey into the heart of darkness. "Dr. Thorne?" she asked, her voice small. "Is it true? Did we really kill the Immortal?" Eris looked out at the vibrant, fragile life of the new world. He thought of Kalen's terror, Vance's sacrifice, the Blight Engine's hungry light. He thought of the Valari dust hanging in the void of the scar, not just destroyed but unmade, denied even the dignity of memory. He knelt, meeting the girl's eyes. "No, child," he said, his voice rough but gentle. "We didn't kill them. We just reminded them." He tapped the data slate, ringing up a simple image, the double helix of human DNA, intertwined with a complex, shimmering Valerie resonance pattern. Immortality isn't about never dying. It's about what you leave behind that can't die. The Valerie forgot that. They tried to build a wall against the end, and the end just flowed around it. He stood, looking up at the unfamiliar stars. "We didn't patent death's upgrade, little one. We just remembered how to live with it. And that's the one thing even gods can't take away." High above, unseen by human eyes, a single, ancient Valari custodian vessel drifted at the edge of the system. Not a bloom reaper, not an enforcer, just a silent observer. On its bridge, the entity once known as Kalen, now stripped of its command, its certainty shattered, watched the human colony. It saw the children playing, the crops growing, the fragile, beautiful struggle against the inevitable. It felt no urge to correct, no desire to prune, only a profound, echoing silence where arrogance once resided. And within that silence, a new, terrifying, and strangely humbling understanding. True immortality wasn't in the cells. It was in the echo of defiance that rang long after the stars themselves had turned to dust. The Deathworlders hadn't won a war. They had taught the universe how to die, and in doing so, how to truly live. The custodian ship turned silently, vanishing into the interstellar dark, carrying not a threat but a question that would haunt its ancient mind for the rest of its long, long life. And somewhere in the void, the dust of 1,000 Vivialari ships drifted. A silent monument not to their eternity but to the one final inescapable truth they had tried so desperately to deny.